Nancy, take it away. I can't hear you, Nancy. Oh, you're muted, Nancy.
Very good. Here we go. Hi.
There we go.
My name is Nancy Mara. My company is called Power Play. I'm originally from Toronto, and Power Play is a hockey term for that one person advantage to help you score your goal. I've spent my whole career building businesses for myself and for other people. And I'm just going to kind of jump in. I just wrote a book called The Advisory Board Playbook. And through the agenda, I'm going to give you a quick overview of myself, the history of the book, how it came together, some of the opportunities, problems, and solutions. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to go over the kind of the 5 Ps for a high-performing board of any type, and a really quick overview on a strategic advisory board, which I think is going to be very useful for a lot of founders, and a customer advisory board, which I think is going to be very helpful for people who are developing products, especially tech products. So to go way back, not that far back, but I was actually at an Agile and Innovation Games event at Adobe in Lehi, Utah. And I was talking about how I use Innovation Games and other games for sales enablement. And everybody kept talking about, oh, well, we use Innovation Games for our customer advisory boards. And I kind of quickly said, well, who's working with the mid-sized tech companies? And they said, well, nobody. And someone had said, it's really important to have a great event manager. And I had done that. So I kind of did a pivot and said, oh, I'm going to be the mid-sized tech company customer advisory board specialist. And the moment I said advisory board, all these weird things happened. So next thing that happened was the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is an investment bank for entrepreneurs, put out this really cool report. It's their 5 things to do, 5 things not to do. Number 1 was innovate, and I was already in that creative problem-solving innovation space. And they said ask for outside advice. And now they're talking about a strategic advisory board. So that was really interesting. And then I went to another event, a sales event, and someone was saying, oh, well, you should join an advisory board as a offline marketing thing. And I'm going, well, this is actually a community or not-for-profit advisory board. It was a sales thing. I had to come up with a product. I, did my own research. I gave them 3 options, let them vote. They all put up their hand for advisory boards. And then, so I pre-sold my book, and that's how I kind of got started. But over the period of time, I just realized how much confusion there was. People didn't understand it. So I interviewed a lot of experts, did the research. I'm certified in all sorts of different facilitation. And after many, many, many iterations, I've released my book. So I've kind of split it into 4 parts. The first one is just a case for advisory boards, what it is, what it isn't, why an advisor would want to do it, and what's in it for them. And I call it the win-win-win, because the founder, the business owner wins because they get this unbelievable knowledge shared with them. They can compress timelines, eliminate costly mistakes, and more importantly, expand their circle of influence. The advisors win because they get to give back, because I'm telling you, every successful person wants to give back, but especially if you can allow them to do it in a formalized way. The advisors also win because they get to sit around a table with their peers and see how other people think, and I've very, very often seen some amazing relationships come together from that. The second part is going to be my 5-step kind of proprietary process that I've taken from all sorts of stuff, and we'll get into that in more detail. The third part of the book is actually a facilitation guide for amazing meetings, because if you're going to do it, you want to make it the best meeting you've ever done. I am kind of known for visual thinking, like the canvases, the mapping, the sticky, design thinking. Let's prototype and validate before we spend a lot of money, that lean approach and gamification. And as I said, it's not just challenge, achievement, reward. Gamification can be done in so many different ways. And the fourth part of the book, I kind of take everything that I've put in before and package it together for 4 different types of advisory boards. So the strategic, which is really good for strategy, decision making, and solutions, and the customer advisory board, which is really for your customer feedback, your marketing research, early stage. And I can, and there's also stuff about community and peer, but that's really I don't have enough time today. So here's the opportunity. This is what really kind of got me so excited when I read that thing from the Business Development Bank of Canada, and that is less than 6% of small to medium-sized enterprises. For them, that's about the 5 million to 100 million mark, have a formalized advisory board, and the ones that do are seeing triple the amount of revenues, double the amount of productivity, which of course is a huge positive impact on your profitability. I'm a bit of a profit strategist, so I'll find profit one way or another, usually in a very fun way. But also, as I continue to work with a lot of startups and doing mentoring and stuff like that, it can, if done properly, add significant value by association. So we'll get into that. Now, here's some of the problems, and I'm very thankful to Sam Wong, who I met through Midday Connect, and we got to talking, and he said, here are the problems that I see with people with advisory boards. They get the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, and they have the wrong incentives. He says there's no processes, like there's no defined process. And for me, that means is you also have a very immature meeting format, meaning they're talking 80% of the time and only listening 20%, where I like to flip that to a more mature model where you are listening 80% and only talking about. And then the other big thing is that too many want to actually facilitate their own meeting, and that is a big no-no. They've got to be sitting around that table with everybody as their peer. And then the last thing he said, there's really no, there's no tools, there's no plan. So they don't actually reverse engineer it, that it's outcome laden, it's not action. And the solutions, aren't really integrated into the strategy. So here's the solution: to be very intentional and strategic, and again, play big, win big. And I've broken it into 5 steps: purpose, players, preparation, planning, and performance. So let's talk about purpose. So why do you need an advisory board? Are you in the fundraising mode? Do you need access to new markets? Do you need advice? Because you'll probably need all 3 of them, but it's really good to prioritize the bigger purpose, because purpose truly motivates people. And then one of the secret sauces is for your this project, like your advisory board project, you do have a secret sauce. You do have, and it's in context. So you have this driving statement and context, which is huge. So then the next step is picking the right players. So the first thing that I tend to do, based on a bit of a SWOT with the founders and anybody on their management team, is to create a war room, but based on categories. So once you understand, is it advice, funding, whatever, then you can start figuring out the categories where you need the most help. Then we build a war room and actually brainstorm 5 to 6 people in each category, and then prioritize them based on their experience, expertise, and contact list. Now, the other cool thing about really visualizing this, it helps you manifest it, but if you have one like linchpin that is got a very high priority and loves you and wants to help you and has already maybe mentored you, you invite them first, because then as you go and do the continuation of the invitation, a lot of people are going to want to be around that table with that person. So then the second step is really creating an invitation deck. It's a little mini pitch deck, but why them? Why you? Why now? And what to expect. And that really makes it so much easier for people to sign on. Now, in the what to expect, I'm not going to get into too much technique right now, but if you are going to give any kind of equity, make sure that that equity is vested over time and as much as possible tied to very specific milestones, so that everybody is continuing to work and collaborate together to get you there, as opposed to giving too much equity for someone just to be on your pitch deck. So then the next part is a preparation. And this is really how do you optimize the time with the advisors? So you want to give them as much information as you can so that they can do their due diligence even in advance. You know, any research that you've done, your product roadmap, your business model, if you have strat plan, if you have like, you know, an agile backlog, your financial model, obviously your business model, financial model. And if it's for funding, you know, your pitch deck, your access to your data room and everything. But here is again, my super secret sauce is coming up with 1 to 3 challenge statements, because that way they can kind of prepare and think about how to best help you before they get in the room. So that's the preparation piece. Then there's the planning. So part one is the logistics, and that's where this event manager type role comes in, because you want to ensure that the meeting is a great experience. So you have a nice, you know, location, all the right meals, you know, all that type of stuff. That's a big part of making it a great experience. But the second part is really this meeting design and having a professional facilitator. Now, if you see here, this is a meeting design storyboard that's part of something called Liberating Structures, and I use it a lot. But you know, what is the outcome that you want to get, or the topic and the goal, and then pick the exercise or the game and why you're doing it, what the steps involved. And so that's how I design meetings, because design is so important. And that design depends on your challenge statement, which depends on the type of people you have in the room, depends on your whole purpose. So I hope you can kind of see how that flows. And then the last P is performance. So coming up with a communication plans, you know, so while you have people together, really get to know them based on your board's preferences, figure out ways to celebrate wins, and incorporate like their corporate storytelling both into your internal and external stories. So this is like always having interactive, fun, continuous engagement. And here's what happens is that when those advisors can actually see that you're implementing a lot of their ideas, then they become even more vested. And the cool part is that your company then becomes their topic of conversation when they're at the water cooler. And we are talking about, you know, you're the most successful people you know. So that now I'm going to kind of go into who you would who you invite on your strategic advisory board. So the purpose of your strategic advisory board is really innovation solutions, better decisions, and you know, eliminating those costly mistakes. So I recommend between 6 to 8 of the most successful people that you and your team know, and experts in their categories. And then the next thing, and then the invitation, that's all in there. But of course, the preparation for this one is your relevant business documents, your challenge statements. In the planning, how I design thing, it probably be a business model canvas. What if? Here's our current state. Let's map out some of the what you guys are, you know, what our advisors are seeing in the market and the industry, the trends and the mapping, and then very specific games or problem solving designed for whatever those outcomes were in your challenge statement. And then, like, you know, monthly updates and celebrations. So that's kind of like how it all fits for a strategic advisory board. For customer advisory board, this is really, you know, product development, customer feedback. We recommend groups of 8 active super users or users, any kind of users, but the active super users are usually even better people to bring in. There's very little preparation on the side of the players, but there's actually quite a lot of preparation in getting the games ready to play. But you basically just send out an invitation to your super users and you'll be amazed. They'll just like, woo, jump right on board. Again, like I said, I tend to use innovation games. I train all the engineers, product owners, people in marketing as observers. So as I'm facilitating, they're kind of capturing the comments. So the discovery game that I love to use is Speedboat. Some of you in the agile world might have seen it, but literally in an hour we can uncover the #1 problem that if you fix would give you the biggest bang for your buck. shaping game. The one I love is prune the product tree. So you have a lot of the products you've built and then what you're looking at building, and you get them to help you start prioritizing by what are the roots, the must-haves, the low-hanging fruits. But what I love particular about this game is you have a lot of blanks. So it allows them to give you ideas, because sometimes we become overly sophisticated consumers of our own product. And the last one, the prioritization game, the one I love is by feature. And you like look at the 5 or 6 features that you're looking at, releasing next. You t-shirt size them based on how expensive it's going to be to develop, and then you give them money, but not enough money to buy everything, like about 45% of the total budget, and they will tell you so fast what drives the highest value. And on top of that, they get this dopamine release when they buy something virtually. So when you have that product available, they want to re-experience that. And as you see on the side here, and why I love innovation games and why it's such a secret to Silicon Slope product development is that very high confidence. You can do it very fast and a very low cost. And then you just follow up with thank you notes, revise, backlog, get them to, invite them to your demo days, things like that. So there you go. Thank you very much. I'm not as technically sophisticated for this meeting as I had hoped. There's my email address. Just send me a note if you're interested. I'll send you my Venmo. I'll get your proper mailing address and I'll sign you a copy. And there you go. Any questions?
Nancy, this is awesome. Thank you. I was like,
did I go too fast? I wanted to slow it down a bit.
no, I think for me that was perfect. But if any of you have questions, I threw one in the chat, but feel free to either just throw your questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask away. I'm going to be selfish, so I'll start just because I put it in the chat there, Nancy, while everybody else is either putting it in the chat or unmuting. But do you suggest when you engage an advisor that it is a bounded time engagement?
I would say, yeah, probably. I mean, and that's where you set your expectations right up front. You can say, for 2 years, for 3 years, for whatever. Obviously, it's a shorter period of time. You're going to give up less equity. And the other thing is, especially if you're going within your business founder and circle of influence, you're really going to find that people just do want to give back. So it's shocking if you do it right how generous people are. But if you want a real longer term working, I would say it also depends on your challenge, right? Because like you might say, for the next year we're at this phase in our thing, so we want to challenge. So you could treat your different advisory boards at different levels of funding if you wanted. So like a pre-seed you're going to have very, very different challenges, and your purpose is going to be a little bit different than if you're going for a Series A or something like that. So you can define it based on how long you think it's going to be to get to that next level.
Do companies struggle with advisors who have a lot of experience, who have a lot to bring, but it's starts to feel like too many cooks in the kitchen, too many strong opinions for how to do things? And if so, how do you structure it in a way that avoids that feeling of okay, we're kind of being overwhelmed by these?
Well, that's where the challenge statement and what you want to achieve, the outcome that you're looking for at that very specific advisor meeting. Because when you set up your expectation and say 1 in-person meeting, 2 1-hour phone calls, and 1 virtual meeting a year. It could be, or if it's every month, it depends on kind of where you're at. But the other thing is, how do you set it up? Because if it's properly facilitated or you create that environment, You're about having meaningful conversations. So, and there are ways to allow people to possibly silent storm first and come up with ideas and then cluster them so that you make it a more collaborative, like we're all helping each other. And I think a perfect example of that is like some of us who get a chance to mentor for venturecapital.org will have 6 or 7 different mentors with different experiences. And our goal is to help that founder get their pitch to the next level. Very simple. So, because everybody's going to see something a little bit different. So if you can make it collaborative, and that's how you kind of get rid of some of the egos in the room. And again, as you set your expectations, it could be part of your board of advisor culture onboarding. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do to, people, yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's how you structure the meeting and how you set the expectation. So here's the meeting. This is what we're going to do. This is what we want to achieve. Now let's everybody work together. Who's got an idea? You know what I mean? And that's kind of where the magic really happens is when you have people with so much different experience and they're all contributing together. It really is. They actually have fun.
Yeah, point them in the right direction, harness it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And capture it again, like that's why I'm saying if you're just doing one in-person advisory board meeting, really bring in an outside facilitator that you work with very closely who can help design a meeting to get the outcomes that you need, because that is so important. And they are then the ones that help control the conversation, and if it's getting a little lopsided, can come in and do some other things. But that's again why, in my humble opinion, I think the founder and the business owner can't be running that meeting or it will get out of control, and they've got to be sitting at that table as a peer, 1,001% engaged and able to answer the questions and capture some of but they're not capturing the ideas. So by again having someone to either put stickies on the wall or do whatever, or map it out or ask the right questions or create the environment, then that's another way to get around it.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Nancy, I loved your slide with the I loved your slide with the sticky notes on it, like that table.
Uh-huh.
You had different candidates for different sections.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, Will showed us how he looks for people on LinkedIn as kind of cold outreach, but do you have suggestions on how you think about which candidates should be put on that board? I mean, I asked
Well,
him.
it's so first of all, it starts with a brainstorm. Like no idea is a bad idea, right? Like I mean, no person, like you can have a super duper wish person like, oh, I want Gary Vaynerchuk, or I want whatever, and that and it doesn't mean it's impossible. And then based on the names, then you actually start like breaking it down into expertise, experience, and contacts. So if you kind of doing a decision making matrix or a ranking model, and then so you under each category, you can then kind of rank them and go with the people that you think would do it and enjoy it and or have the right connections or expertise or context. So you prioritize them after you've brainstormed, and that kind of becomes your invitation. And if that person says no, then you go to the next person under that. But if you're very more strategic, and this I think even goes more so for the not-for-profits, that are doing this, is they kind of just grab anybody as opposed to being a little more intentional about who do we want and making the invitation as opposed to and again it depends on like I said, if it's a customer advisory board, then you're looking at, your super users. And again, you can go through the same process, like, who is ever using it. And does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Can you, one of the questions that brings up for me is, if say I'm raising a round of funding and I bring on several advisors who I think would be good, but they disagree with a strategy. One says you should just raise $500,000 and one says you should raise $5 million. Do you have suggestions on how to manage that input such that you're not going to
Well, I mean, I think, part of it is just asking the questions. Well, why do you think it's that much? And then and then they go, well, in my experience, blah, 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 blah. And who knows, like, here's a cool thing about something like that. And I'm just like hypothesizing, but I would probably believe that you were going to come up with something completely different than those two people, than the two ends, and with the input of some other people, so that you actually, that's where that kind of innovative solution that nobody would have thought of comes from, if it's done in the right way, right? So again, it goes back to asking good questions and creating the right environment to have that kind of meaningful conversation. Like in my experience, I would only raise this much, and I do see that all, I see that often, and different people are going to have different ideas, but I think the magic comes when you come up with a whole new idea that nobody thought about. Like maybe it's you split the tranches. Like, oh, that's really good, but that's really good, but maybe we just do this to get to that point, and then going back to something like a Sam Wong would say, and then what's your inflection point? So is there a fundraising strategy, and if that's one of the outcomes that you wanted to come out of your advisory board meeting, then that could be very interesting to say, well, what are the inflection points? When would we do this? And collaborate, and you might come up with a whole new strategy that you would never have gotten if you were talking one-on-one to the $5 million person and one-on-one to the $500 person.
That's awesome. I've got, go ahead, Bart.
So I have another, we have several people reaching out wanting to be advisors. These are people who maybe haven't been advisors in the past, would love to serve on an advisory board of a startup like ours. And we've tried to kind of weigh the pros and cons of someone who's a little earlier and doesn't have the name brand of someone else who's later in their career and has more of a name brand. And I think the advantages of the ones who are eager, they're willing to put in the effort, for less or even no compensation, that sort of thing, versus more expensive, less effort, right? Have you seen, like, if there's kind of a easy way to decide between those, or is it basically just what are you trying to get done and who's going to help you accomplish that?
I think that's a big part of it. Like, what is the challenge that you want to solve? And, sometimes, like having been a scrum master and a product owner and working with, like, every idea is a good idea. But sometimes if I'm facilitating something, I've put like a venture capitalist with a student with someone else, and he was and facilitated this thing called Troika Consulting, where everyone acts as a consultant. And what ends up happening is he was blown away that these kids who knew nothing about his business was actually able to come up with ideas that very highly paid people wouldn't. So there definitely is a benefit from that. And I'm saying, so if you're one of the categories for your startup is marketing and social media and things like that, so maybe you don't have that big name person, but if that person can, like, again, if you can find the right slot for them where they can add value, then bring them on. That's awesome. Or the other thing could be, listen, you're not quite ready for our advisory board, but you can sit in, and then we're going to have actual committees, advisory committees or something like that. So you can build other things so that they can actually become more of a volunteer worker bee, as opposed to, but you would allow them to be part of the bigger conversation. Because the interesting thing is, with a lot of these things, even if I were doing an open space with an organization or something like that, it's like invitation versus mandate. So by inviting people into the conversation, as opposed to mandating it, you're going to get a much higher adoption. So, by inviting them in at an earlier stage, but letting them know specifically where they fit, and that they're almost like an advisor in training, but you do want their ideas, because you never know where your best ideas are going to come from. So yeah, I would, and again, that's going to set your expectations. Maybe put a few more people on the board and allow them to be the note takers and do some of the stuff, or teach them more about the facilitation. I think there's a lot of ways around that, but yeah, I'd love to chat with you about it. But if someone's eager, absolutely, they're going to work a lot harder, and you never know who they know too. So that could be part of, like, that expanding your sphere of influence and who they can bring to the table.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I think we're right at time, Nancy. This has been fantastic. Love the presentation as well. I've already had a few requests on hopefully getting a copy of that. If you're willing
Oh,
to
absolutely.
share it, we can.
Yeah, for sure.
And then also,
I'll put my,
if you want to put your email in the chat as well, Nancy, because
Yeah,
the
doing that.
presentation isn't up anymore. I'd suggest everybody who's interested reach out to you.
Oh, I got to retype it. There's not 2 A's.
Cool. Well, thanks again for your time, Nancy. Look forward to talking with you again about this, but really appreciate it. If you want,
the second one.
Okay,
Not the Nancy with the 2 A's.
Okay.
That's Nancy M. Business. Nancy for Nancy Mayer.
Perfect.
And I got my copy. Thank you very much. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Awesome.
Just in the nick of time for your big meeting for the mountain bike organization. I'm so happy it arrived in time. And Carly, reach out if you need any ideas for icebreakers or different things when you have everybody in the room. And yeah, like, there's a lot of facilitation tools and techniques in the book, but if you need any help or reverse engineering, it's just give me a call.
Perfect. Nancy, thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.